The rotary engine didn't die. It was executed. You've been told a simple story, a neat story. It failed because of bad engineering, bad emissions, and awful fuel economy. That's the easy-to-digest narrative car enthusiasts have been fed for decades. But that's not the whole story. It's a lie of omission. The truth is, the engine of the future was killed by a perfect storm, a toxic combination of staggering corporate arrogance and a desperate marketing pivot. This wasn't an accident. It was a chain reaction. The world's biggest automaker publicly executed the technology. At the same time, its greatest champion quietly maneuvered it into a niche corner it could never escape. Today we uncover the evidence. The Wankel engine wasn't just a failure, it was a victim. To understand the execution, you have to understand the dream. It begins not in Japan, but in post-war Germany, with an inventor named Felix Wankel. He was obsessed with a vision. An engine that didn't slam pistons up and down, but spun with the grace of a turbine. Instead of hundreds of moving parts, his engine would have just a few. A spinning triangular rotor doing all four jobs: intake, compression, combustion, and exhaust, in one smooth, continuous motion. It was revolutionary. Wankel engines were tiny, light, and almost perfectly smooth. They revved to incredible speeds and made astonishing power for their size. In the 1960s, a German company named NSU put the dream on the road. First, the NSU Spider. Then, the stunningly futuristic NSU Row 80 sedan in 1967. The Row 80 looked like it was from the next century. It won Car of the Year and put the entire world on notice. At the same time, a small Japanese company bet its future on this strange new engine. That company was Mazda. While NSU struggled with early reliability, especially apex seals that wore out far too quickly, Mazda's engineers, the 47 Ronin, worked relentlessly. They pioneered new seal materials, battling the chatter marks that plagued early designs. With their beautiful Cosmo Sport 11OS in 1967, Mazda proved the Rotary could be reliable. By the early 70s, the revolution was in full swing. Mercedes-Benz, Citroën, Nissan, everyone was experimenting with the Wankel. The piston engine's days seemed numbered, and that's when the biggest player of them all decided it wanted a piece. In the early 1970s, General Motors wasn't just a car company. It was the largest, most powerful industrial corporation on Earth. And when GM decided it wanted the Rotary, it went all in. In November 1970, the company paid $50 million just to license the technology, a staggering sum at the time. This wasn't a side project. It was a mission from the top, led by GM President Ed Cole, a true believer. He saw the Rotary as the future of General Motors. The plan was incredibly ambitious. The Wankel wasn't for one car. It was being groomed to replace piston engines across the entire GM lineup. The first target was the 1974 Chevrolet Vega. But GM was also exploring two-rotor and even multi-rotor engines for cars like the Corvette. They poured hundreds of millions more into new factories and tooling. GM basically promised the world they had mastered the Wankel. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. GM's engineers were hitting the same walls as everyone else, but with a fatal dose of arrogance. They couldn't get reliability, emissions, and fuel economy to cooperate. Fix one, and the others got worse. The engine's long, moving combustion chamber made it notoriously difficult to burn fuel completely. That meant high emissions and a serious thirst for gas. Even though GM's own tests showed their rotaries could be reliable, some lasting for hundreds of thousands of miles, they just couldn't crack the fundamental efficiency problem. Still, the company pushed forward, blinded by its own momentum. The factories were being prepped. GM had placed a colossal bet, and it was about to go very, very wrong. The Wankel had a problem, a challenge that 1970s engineering couldn't solve. Its thermal efficiency was fundamentally poor. In a piston engine, combustion happens in a tight, contained space. The Rotary's combustion chamber is different. It's long, thin, and always moving. This shape is terrible for turning heat into power. A huge chunk of energy is simply wasted as heat. This wasn't just bad gas mileage. It was an engineering challenge baked into the Wankel's DNA. And just as GM wrestled with this, the US government laid a trap. In 1970, Congress passed the Clean Air Act. It set aggressive new targets, demanding a 90% reduction in automotive emissions by 1975, especially unburned hydrocarbons. The law wasn't designed to kill the Wankel, but it might as well have been. The Rotary's single biggest weakness was high hydrocarbon emissions, a direct result of its inefficient combustion. Suddenly, the engine's dirty little secret was a matter of federal law. GM's engineers now faced an impossible task. They could make the engine clean, or they could make it fuel efficient. They couldn't do both. Every attempt to meet the new emissions standards made the fuel economy even worse. The dream was crashing into the hard reality of thermodynamics and government regulation. The clock was ticking. October 1973. The world changed overnight. The OPEC oil embargo hit. Gas prices in America shot through the roof. Stations ran dry. Long lines formed. A national panic took hold. Suddenly, fuel economy wasn't just a feature. It was the only thing that mattered. For the Rotary engine, this was a death sentence. Its thirst for gas went from a quirky flaw to an unforgivable sin. Right as public anxiety peaked, the EPA began publishing official fuel economy numbers. Road tests had already shown the Rotary was thirsty, but the EPA data made it official. It exposed the flaw for everyone to see. Mazda's Rotary cars were at the bottom of the list. The media and the public did the rest. The narrative was set. The Rotary engine is a gas-guzzling monster. Sales of Mazda's Rotary cars plummeted. For General Motors, this was the final nail in the coffin. The business case for their massive Rotary program had evaporated. An engine that couldn't meet emission standards and was now a public symbol of inefficiency was commercially toxic. The dream was dead. September 1974. GM President Ed Cole, the Rotary's biggest champion, retired. Just days later, his successor, who never shared his passion for the Wankel, cancelled the entire program. The execution was swift. It was brutal. The fallout was immediate, catastrophic. GM had poured over $50 million into licensing and hundreds of millions into development, all of it worthless. The company admitted that while they had solved reliability, they couldn't meet future emission standards and deliver acceptable fuel economy at the same time. The message to the global auto industry was chilling. If mighty GM couldn't make the Wankel work, nobody could. It was a public declaration that the technology was a dead end. The ripple effect was devastating. American Motors Corporation, or AMC, was one of the biggest victims. They had designed their futuristic pacer specifically around GM's tiny Rotary engine. The pacer's iconic short hood and bubble design only made sense with a compact Wankel. When GM cancelled the engine, AMC had to scramble. They hastily re-engineered the car to cram their own bulky inline-six engine into a space it was never meant for. The car became heavy, underpowered, and compromised. The pacer became a symbol of the Rotary's broken promises. A car forever haunted by the ghost of the engine it was supposed to have. The execution at GM should have been the end, but it wasn't. While the world's biggest automaker surrendered, Mazda, a company a fraction of its size, refused to give up. The story of how they survived is even more incredible. And in surviving, they secretly sealed the Rotary's fate for the next 40 years. If you're digging this dive into hidden car history, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell. You won't want to miss what happened next. Mazda was on the brink of collapse. Its entire identity was tied to an engine the world now saw as a failure. But instead of giving up, Mazda's engineers went to war. They couldn't fix the engine's fundamental flaws overnight, so they pulled off a brilliant illusion. On the engineering side, they developed the thermal reactor, an insulated chamber in the exhaust that got incredibly hot, burning off unburned fuel before it left the tailpipe. It was a clever, crude bandage. It helped them scrape by emissions tests, but did nothing for the core fuel economy problem. The real genius was in the marketing. Mazda made a strategic pivot that would define the Rotary's future. They realized they could no longer sell the Wankel as a mainstream engine. The perception of it being thirsty was too strong, so they stopped fighting it. They leaned into it. In 1978, Mazda launched the RX-7. This wasn't a sensible sedan. It was a pure, lightweight, affordable sports car. Mazda marketed the Rotary's flaws as features: high revving and no low-end torque. That's because it's a racing engine for people who love the red line. A unique, high-pitched sound. That's the sound of the future. The RX-7 wasn't for your average commuter. It was a special machine for a special kind of driver. It was a masterful move. By repositioning the Rotary as a niche performance engine, Mazda saved it from extinction. They built a cult following that celebrated the engine's quirks instead of criticizing its weaknesses. But in doing so, they also locked it in a gilded cage. This secret marketing war ensured the Wankel would survive. But it also guaranteed it would never again be seen as a practical engine for the masses. For the next 3 decades, the Rotary lived on, but its world kept shrinking. Mazda continued to build legendary sports cars. The second and third generation RX-7s became icons of the tuning scene. But the fundamental problems, fuel consumption and emissions, never went away. As environmental regulations got tighter, keeping the Wankel compliant became an expensive uphill battle. The RX-8 was eventually pulled from the European market around 2010 because its Renesis engine couldn't meet new Euro 5 standards without a costly redesign. The final act was the Mazda RX-8 from 2003 to 2012. It was a brilliant, unique car, but it cemented the engine's reputation for being fussy. Owners had to be diligent about checking oil. The engine was prone to flooding if shut off before it was warm, quirks that a fan might accept, but an average driver would find frustrating. Further proof the Rotary wasn't for everyone. In 2012, Mazda built the last RX-8. Citing falling sales and the immense cost of development, the production line went silent. For over a decade, it seemed the story was finally over. The public execution in the 70s, followed by decades of being cornered into a niche, had led to a slow, inevitable fade to black. So, what killed the Wankel? It was a conspiracy of circumstances. There was no secret meeting, no smoke-filled room. The plot was written right out in the open for decades. First, GM's arrogant public failure created the narrative. The engine was flawed, a dead end. Their surrender poisoned the well for everyone. Second, Mazda's brilliant survival strategy sealed the engine's fate. By marketing the Rotary as a high-strung, niche performance engine, they saved it. But they also ensured it could never be seen as a practical, mainstream alternative again. The conspiracy wasn't one of malice. It was one of consequence. The combined weight of corporate failure and calculated marketing sentenced the engine to a niche it could never escape. But then, The ghost in the machine stirred. In 2023, Mazda did the unthinkable. They brought the Rotary back. The new Mazda MX-30R EV is a plug-in hybrid. It uses a tiny, new generation, single-rotor Wankel. But this time, the engine doesn't drive the wheels. It acts as a smooth, quiet, compact, onboard generator to recharge the battery. The very traits that made it a compromised engine, its small size, its smoothness, its lack of vibration, make it the perfect range extender. The engine of the future, executed in the 1970s and sentenced to a life on the fringes, has returned. Not as a hero, but as a quiet supporter that has finally found its true purpose. The conspiracy of circumstance may have killed the dream, but it couldn't kill the idea. And it proves that maybe, just maybe, the Wankel engine wasn't a failure after all. It was just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up.